It may be stating the obvious to observe that Brother Cadfile has never been married. After all, he's a Benedictine monk who's sworn a vow of chastity. But Cadfile didn't join the order until he was 40, and he spent many of those early years roaming the world, from Venice to Cyprus to the Holy Land, as a soldier. You could be sure that in those reckless and dangerous days, chastity was the last thing on his mind. Cadfile rarely speaks about the women he's known. It's hardly appropriate in his present circumstances. But in his young life, there were more than a few ladies. Ariana, the Greek boat girl, the Venetian beauty, Bianca, and he has especially fond memories of a Saracen widow who shared his bed during the First Crusade. Cadfile never took a wife, although he came close once in his youth when he pledged his love to a young English girl, only to abandon her when the call to arms and adventure lured him away. His former love is but a bittersweet memory, until tonight, when that memory is unexpectedly made flesh. And flesh, as Cadfile knows, is vulnerable to temptation. Unfortunately, it's also vulnerable to murder. When a killer strikes within the very walls of Shrewsbury Abbey, it will take one who wears the cowl of a Benedictine to uncover the secret of monkshood. It must have saddened Brother Cadfile to see Heribert step down as abbot of Shrewsbury. After all, Heribert had played a crucial role in Cadfile's decision to become a monk. In 1120, Cadfile was serving as man-at-arms to a knight who had filed suit against the abbey. Heribert stood ready to plead the abbey's case in the king's court. But before he could do so, the knight kidnapped him. Cadfile was appalled by his employer's behavior and helped Heribert to escape. The court ruled in the abbey's favor, and not surprisingly, Cadfile found himself without a job. It was then, with the example of a devout and courageous man of God to inspire him, that Cadfile put aside his sword and joined the holy order of the Benedictines. He entered a tradition that began with St. Benedict, the father of Western monasticism. As a young man, Benedict was so disgusted by the decadent culture of Rome that he abandoned his studies to devote himself to God and sought solitude in the mountains. Though he had renounced the world wouldn't return the favor, and he soon found himself with a flock of disciples, so many, in fact, that he later established 12 monasteries. Benedict died in 583, but his order flourished, and half a century later, it gained a foothold in England, where it stood unrivaled for the next years. In his writings, St. Benedict demanded of his disciples a lifelong vow of poverty, chastity, obedience, and stability. Although he'd been a hermit, his teachings emphasized the importance of the monastic community, which divided the day into 3 equal portions for work, prayer, and study. And in the case of Brother Cadfile, solving the occasional murder. I'm Diana Rigg. Good night. If you're a detective in 12th century England, how do you go about solving a murder? Fingerprint identification is 7 centuries away. As for a blood test or a DNA analysis, you might just as well try witchcraft. So, what's a medieval investigator to do? If you're Brother Cadfile, monk of the Benedictine order, you rely on your God-given talents, which in his case include medical expertise and a thorough knowledge of the natural world. Saying a prayer doesn't hurt either. Still, a mastery of herbal potions and knowledge of plants hardly seem effective weapons in the search for a dangerous criminal, especially for a monk who can't draw a sword to defend himself. But Cadfile is a man ahead of his time, a pioneering forensic scientist who sees clues in a crushed flower that even Sherlock Holmes might overlook. Cadfile's knowledge of nature serves him well tonight when he tries to save a songbird from extinction. A minstrel accused of murder with an angry mob at his heels. But when the boy seeks sanctuary in the abbey, it's not only Cadfael, the man of science, who comes to his aid, but Cadfael, the man of God, who will move heaven and earth to find the killer who's out to clip the wings of the sanctuary sparrow. Ellis Peters, the creator of Brother Cadfile, is really Edith Pargeter, who spent more than 40 years writing historical novels and contemporary mysteries before combining the two in 1977 with the first Cadfile novel, A Morbid Taste for Bones. That book, like all the Cadfile stories, is set in Shropshire, where Pargeter was born in 1913 and has lived ever since. Before she turned to full-time writing, she worked in a pharmacy, a job that provided plenty of ideas for her mystery plots. During World War II, her communications work with the Navy earned her a medal, presented by King George VI. She was honored again in 1994, when she was named a Dame of the British Empire, at the same time that Brother Cadfile himself, Derek Jacobi, was knighted. When Pargeter started writing mysteries in 1959, she adopted the Ellis Peters pseudonym to set them apart from her other work. The Cadfile books have broken barriers of history and language to speak to contemporary readers from New York to Tokyo, with good reason. As Peters explains, I have one sacred rule about the thriller. It must have morality. If it strays from the side of the angels, provokes total despair, takes pleasure in evil, that is unforgivable sin. I'm not very good at villains, which no doubt accounts for her continuing fascination with Brother Cadfile, a character who has inspired not only his fans, but the author herself. He's really made me think about what I believe, she says. I say that I created him, but he's been busy creating me. What more could a devout Benedictine hope for? I'm Diana Rigg. Good night. As a man who has renounced worldly ways for the life of a monk, Brother Cadfile has little use for the intrigue of politics or the violence of war. But that wasn't always true. For many years before he took the cowl, Cadfile was a soldier fighting for God and King during the First Crusade. But he laid down his weapons long ago to battle evil in a gentler guise, forsaking the petty schemes of earthly monarchs to serve the cause of a celestial king. It's hard for him to throw off old habits, though. Cadfile's experience of the secular world often forces him to meddle in affairs beyond the abbey walls, much to the dismay of Abbot Heribert and Prior Robert, who view Cadfile as the black sheep of their flock, straying too often into forbidden pastures. At least one person is grateful for Cadfile's efforts, Hugh Berengar, the Sheriff of Shropshire, who considers the monk his closest friend and unofficial partner. Tonight, we go back in time to see how the two men first met, under dire circumstances indeed. As the story opens, England has been embroiled for 3 years in a bloody civil war between rivals for the crown, King Stephen and his cousin, the Empress Maud. Stephen thinks he has a firm grip on Shrewsbury, but his appointed sheriff, William Fitzalan, has betrayed him and rallied the townspeople to the Empress's cause. From his siege camp nearby, Stephen prepares to strike the traitors down, unaware that his bloody vengeance will leave behind one corpse too many. One of the many challenges of making a television program set in the 12th century is finding a location that looks like the England of 800 years ago. In the case of Cadfile, the location wasn't in England at all, but in Hungary. There's a stretch of countryside about 30 miles outside Budapest, which bears a striking resemblance to the green pastures of rural England, except that it doesn't rain as much. There, in a studio lot, the Cadfile crew built a replica of medieval Shrewsbury and its abbey. using steel and timber scaffolding covered by a plaster and polystyrene skin. Even the river which flows nearby is fake. Sorry if this disillusions you, but the producers of the series went to all this trouble for one simple reason. The original Shrewsbury Abbey, founded in 1083, was destroyed 4.5 centuries ago. But that didn't stop it from inspiring many of the plots of the Brother Cadfile mysteries, and even some of the characters. Heribert the Abbot in tonight's story was lifted straight from the pages of the Abbey's history, as was Prior Robert. Shrewsbury Abbey flourished for nearly 500 years, until 1540, when it was dissolved by the order of Henry VIII, and many of its buildings were destroyed. The few remaining ones were demolished in the 19th century to make way for a railway station. But portions of the Abbey church survived, including a small shrine to St. Winifred, whose bones were kept there. In 1977, the shrine inspired a writer named Ellis to create a story about those relics, called A Morbid Taste for Bones, the novel that introduced Brother Cadfile to the world. I'm Diana Rigg. Good night.